hockey mom?
Yep.
Oh my gosh.
2 skaters.
Oh.
Yeah.
I can't imagine.
Well, we only had 2 kids. So there's
So
some of
that
those
was 3?
some of
Is
our
that what
friends
you're
that have more than that.
I only have 2 kids and I still can't imagine it. I just haven't told mine that like that sort of thing is available.
Oh.
Like you just gotta keep it under wraps as long as possible.
We would go crazy on that. Kept it on the wrap.
Just what? Oh, I'm sorry. That's just not
I've never heard of
available.
that story.
It's so strange. How odd.
Do you want an agenda?
I got one.
Okay, thank you.
Can I have one?
No, Judy.
I was gonna say, I'm so used to sitting on my phone, and I'm like. Unless it just shows me what I have to say, it's good. I'm on the screen with the agenda, and I just read the agenda.
I don't even know what I'm going to
That's
say. I don't know how I'm
hard.
going to know what she's
No,
going to
that's
say.
hard.
Sorry,
It's
way worse
right,
than
it's
I-
it.
Yeah.
I'm just
And I was like, when the
puppet.
agenda's on the Zoom, it's different, so. Okay, we are at 5:01, so I'm going to call the special meeting to order. Can I have a roll call, please?
Sure. Nelson.
Here.
Shuda.
Here.
Stata.
Here.
Bergstrom.
Here.
Session. Goblin.
Here.
Severson.
Here.
Thank you.
Awesome, thank you. I need a motion to adopt or amend the agenda.
I will move to adopt the agenda as presented.
I will second that motion.
Awesome, any discussion or questions? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay, thank you, we have an agenda. Next on the item is community input, so we allow 15 minutes, or in this case, should be as much as we need. 3 minutes per speaker to talk, so if there's anyone in the crowd that wants to say anything, please feel free to go ahead. Yes? Did you guys just listening today? Anybody? Okay, we will keep going then. Okay, discussion and possible action items. A is the listening sessions and community feedback.
Part of tonight is a chance to review all the information that we got from the listening sessions before we have the joint meeting with the village board on Monday. So in your packet, you had a summary of the results from the listening sessions that included the comments made aloud that many of you were able to hear in person or watch on the recording. And it also included the feedback community members submitted on our online form, which has been live for, I want to say, a month and a half or so of being available for community members to provide feedback in that way. So this is on the agenda. We'll have the opportunity to discuss any takeaways you have from the feedback. The presentation made from the listening session, the slideshows, was also in your packet as a reference. And then the next agenda item we'll have will be a chance to ask any questions or clarifications on the feedback. So if you were wondering something because of that feedback, we can talk about that in a moment. I will turn it over for your discussion on the feedback from the listening sessions.
Anybody go first?
Do we do any quantifying numerically of kind of which sites were which?
We did not. If you look at the feedback, it's all very nuanced, and as I read it, I was like, well, can we tally? But a lot of it's just, there's just so much information from people in those. I think it'd be hard to objectively tally those. But feel free to do that on your own. I just don't feel like I want to be weighing people's opinions in that way.
That's completely fair. I just wanted to know if it was available before I end up diving in later.
Yeah.
Okay.
I guess my sense, just to share a couple of thoughts is, from the feedback, I think we heard very different opinions. Some were in favor of a certain spot. Some were in favor of not a place, right? So a lot of the feedback was very well done, thought out. Other feedbacks showed that they, that they haven't been part of this process. They haven't seen the things that we've gone through. They don't understand the work that's been put into it. And so, I tended to put a little bit more stock in the feedback that was more intentional, that I felt like represented people that had done research and really understood the moment, the kind of the where we're at as a board and where the community's at, whereas some of the others were, coming at the last moment and just kind of sharing some emotional thoughts. And so I put a greater emphasis on those that I felt like truly understood where we were and what we were trying to accomplish. And with that, there were I'd say three main themes that I heard. One is there were a group of people saying, don't build at the site that we're at right now in Maine. In fact, very few said anything like supporting that site. I think that was probably the most consistent
Right, I
thing.
agree with that.
And then you had almost two parties. You had one party who said, I think that if you build at Alpine Keller, that would be a great thing. And you had others who said, please don't build there, you're taking away our green space. And so that was very, like, if you had people talking about what they, sites, that was, they either loved that site or they didn't love that site. People who loved that site were thinking about it from how does the library draw people to that and make that site more valuable. And those who, it was interesting because those who really didn't want that, my feeling was they didn't want the green space to go away. They're both trying to accomplish the same thing, which was let's make sure that we have this beautiful green space. But they have very divergent, very different ideas of how to accomplish that. I think those were kind of my key takeaways from going, to the sessions and listening to all the feedback and everything. Don't build at Maine. You have people who love it, you people that don't. Very few who didn't, though, had a alternative that was, a good alternative. I think that's maybe the one
struggled with
challenge.
that the most, right? That there was a strong push to keep, from a group, to keep things downtown. And that same group did not advocate for the current location.
Right.
Right? Like, it was not like we have to keep it where it is. And I think one of the struggles I think we face, not just our board, but like the wider village board, is I understand and very much see the desire to like kind of keep our downtown, vibrant and as it is. And what I struggle with is the current site that we have is not compatible with the size and quality of library that we as a community are heading towards needing. And at the same time, our options in the downtown area are quite limited, especially from the board's perspective, right? Like, our ability to kind of shove in a particular direction is maybe, it's not necessarily just up to us, and I struggle a lot with that. Did you?
Yeah, I remember, I was thinking about that exact same thing earlier today, because I remember back in the visioning sections, we all wanted to keep everything downtown, and have this campus kind of like Fitchburg did, but of course, that's kind of a joke when you think about it, because Fitchburg doesn't have a downtown.
They just have a centralized
But
location.
even back then when we were discussing all that, I remember learning back then that, where we are now and where the library is, they couldn't both expand on this spot.
Mm-hmm.
And the library could, we were told really it's a much better spot for the senior center because the library needs to be much bigger and the soil conditions, etc. And so, you know, we really didn't have any options until the church site opened up, and I think that's why everybody leapt for it. And now we're realizing, well, you know, that's just not viable either. So that's kind of the struggle. It's like what you want and what you can actually reasonably accomplish just doesn't seem to match up.
I'm the newest member of this board and on the village board, and just for record, I have not been at meetings because my husband had some pretty serious surgery and I was late tonight because somebody's supposed to sit with him and that person was late, and so I apologize. But I did watch all of the sessions and I read all of the information, and I was part of the board meeting when we were presented with the pros and cons of all the sites. And I want to start all my comments by saying I can commend you for the years, literally years of work this board has put in trying to come up with the best solution for this library and for the village. And so it's not an easy task, and clearly you have done a ton of work in trying to find that. The thing that was really interesting to me in looking over some of the information for tonight was the visioning sessions and the things that people, the polls of what people liked and didn't like about them. It's like, oh my gosh, when you look at these things and what people want in a library, and me included, I mean, I'll be the first to admit I've not been a regular patron of the library. I lived out of the village, but my husband was. And he had to drive here. Many people who use this library, even though it's in walking distance from a lot of places, drive to get here. Right. And so that is going to be a big portion of whatever library location there is. The Main Street location not only is too small for the library that we want, it's also, to put it there, would be incredibly destructive to the neighborhood. And by extension, not just to that little block of neighborhood, but to the whole downtown area. So I personally would, think that, wow, we really want to have that kind of an environmental impact when this other vision is what has been laid out by the people who were part of that process.
Especially when the focus of this desire to talk about Keller Alpine and keeping that natural space, if we keep that space at the cost of the health and well-being of the rest of our wider village ecosystem, that seems.
Well, and I also wonder about what's the feasibility of that site at Keller Alpine Meadows never being developed. I mean, I would foresee that that's going to be developed, and so if we think about that in the future of village planning in the holistic big picture, what better place to have a library that would really enhance the space and have the opportunity to really have a positive environmental impact on a space that does have, fragile portions to it. Not all of it is clearly fragile, but it could be improved and enhanced and without the kinds of infrastructure costs that would go into trying to put something in this space. My understanding is that would be pretty astronomical to create something that would bear the load. Is that correct? Did I understand that correctly?
Yeah.
Of a library?
And at some point you can ask whatever questions you have of the different sites too. I mean, that's part of what we want to get to tonight.
Yeah.
And maybe we can kind of go one by one. We can get everybody's feedback and then maybe talk about what you think the specific viable sites are. We're trying to boil it down to 3 or 4. We'd like to hear what your feedback is on what you think the possible sites even are.
Did you?
Yeah. Can I ask a question here? Because this is one of the things that's maybe been tough for me to navigate. We have to wait on the village here, right? I'm happy for us to have a discussion and everything, but one of the things I'm struggling with here is I'm worried we're putting the cart before the horse, right? If we can project like all of these different options, but realistically, like the village, it has to make some decisions, some pretty tough ones. I do not envy y'all, about what the priorities for the village are. And then based on those, then we as the library board can determine, do we wish for whatever they might be offering, or do we wish to build a smaller library on the site, on the main site? And I'm struggling, like, how much theoretical should we be getting into? Does that make sense?
Yeah, so that's so the way we formulated the agenda is, our goal is not to come away from tonight with any recommendation on sites. So our goal is to get out any feedback we have from the listening sessions, to go work through any questions we have, including the cost question that Jeff will answer. We can get to that first in the question section. We want to talk about our priorities for the library that might be related to some sites, that might not, but what's important to us is a certain size, is a certain amenities. So to really be able to clearly articulate and all be on the same page about what our priorities and needs are. And then, how we're going to approach that joint meeting with the village board is the final agenda item. So the village board may very much want us to have a recommendation for them to react to, but I think the first step would be to meet with them on Monday and say, how are we going to approach this together as a team? And we'll talk about that in more depth later on. And then, like you said, we don't want to get ahead of it, make a recommendation and have it not be the direction they want to go. But then also, if they want us to make a recommendation, that might be something that we need to generate to move things forward. So is it okay if we approach the rest of the meeting with that kind of plan in mind? Does that help?
Thank you so
Okay.
much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, so selecting a site is not an agenda item, but is kind of woven into all the agenda items, so you might be able to share points and it might be related to the agenda items as we proceed. So before we get to the question that Carleen asked, what other folks want to comment on any feedback to the listening session or the online feedback form comments, or any takeaways or points they want to talk about?
I just want to reiterate a couple of points that have already been made, but first I want to say thank you to everyone who's been participating in the feedback from our first go-round 3 years ago to this round now. I do appreciate everyone's opinion, and I kind of had 4 takeaways, 3 of which were Kyle's.
But you have an original one.
Well, and then one that was kind of goes off of Coral's. Like, accessibility is very important, and I think that came out in both of our listening sessions. So I just want to make sure that we are thinking about that as we kind of continue the discussion tonight.
I want to thank the library staff for all of their help in accumulating all this information, for running all these listening sessions, for answering all the questions that we have. You guys, you and your staff, Jennifer, have been amazing, and we couldn't be here without you guys. So I just want to thank you guys for all of that.
And I want to add to that, I want to thank OCA
OCA
Media for meticulously showing up at all of our listening sessions and doing a great job of making those available to the community. A lot of people tuned in that weren't actually present. And I also want to say a big thank you to the village staff, because they've been working in partnership, especially Elise, and trying to answer questions and explore options, and we would not be able to be as articulate and have as good of an understanding of options that are available without Elise and Jeff and Martin and all the village staff's help on that. Also Laura, who painstakingly reviewed the footage to try to represent everybody's comments as close to as much as possible, which is not an easy task. We want to be fair to the folks who participated. So I think special thanks to Laura and the other staff who helped out with that.
So is there any other listening session community feedback things we want to talk about before we go to the next agenda item? I'll make sure everybody has a chance.
If I can, just one more thing that I've just been appreciating recently. I think for those of us who have been part of this journey since it started, I felt like at the beginning we lacked a little bit of like holistic community engagement. Like there was a very, the board was involved. We had, village employees and a few important people, that were involved in conversations, and part of this process has been whether we didn't get a consensus from the community, but we got the community to really share thoughts, and priorities, and I've been dwelling on the fact that didn't exist before, and I think whatever the decision is that we go forward, at least we know where others in the community sit on some of these issues, and that's helpful. It's more, I feel more informed as a result.
Thanks, Kyle.
Yeah.
I think probably a lot of people, like the people who have watched this, feel more informed about a lot of things related to the village after being part of this process. Just, everything from parking policy, there's just a lot of things that this project has brought to the fore that I think has educated a lot of folks.
Yeah, I think people falsely assumed at the beginning that the library board was driving all of this. We are going to be given a site and asked, saying you can now build your library. We've obviously been a part of this bigger process, and hopefully a big part, but understanding what the village does, what the village board versus what the village employees do, and then how we play into that. I'm guessing that the community is much more aware of how those dynamics work than they have in the past. I know I'm more aware than I have been in the past.
I think it's also heartening to note that the biggest concerns presented have been environmental impact and accessibility. I think that says a lot about the community in general.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
I think the other thing I took away is that people really care about not just the library, but also the community, and the visions for those people caring might be different and head in different directions, sometimes not even competing directions, but just to have people be engaged in the process and to get out and say what's important to them, I think is very important, and that they feel the library is important enough for them to get out and talk about that too, so I appreciate that.
Yeah, I think I said this in one of the meetings, but as frustrated as we've all felt at different times that it's hard to find a path forward and everything, it's actually a really great problem that we have in front of us, and that we have a community that's super engaged, really cares about our community facilities, our public places, but we're also a growing community that has a dense, highly developed downtown. We don't have a lot of vacant properties that are sitting around just sort of withering away to be redeveloped, and that's a sign of a strong, healthy, growing community. And we're growing in all directions. We serve, not only people that live in the village, but the library serves people, beyond that too. And just keeping that in mind that it's larger than just a couple square blocks, that there's a whole community out there that benefits from the services that the library provides. And it's been really cool to see and struggle with the place we find ourselves in, but it's a good place to be, even though it may not always feel like it.
Anyone else?
We could go on forever, but it just things pop up, right, in your mind.
And it's meant to keep asking more questions, so feel free to chime in at future items too.
But just, of some of the comments that really stood out to me, or some of the, the way that people made their intentions known, I thought 3 of them stood out in my mind. One, Elise, was your comment about what makes a village or a downtown strong, and that's having a population center that is near the center of the village. That was a comment that, to me, really stuck with me. The Oregon Nature Alliances and just their organization of what that space could look like, I thought was well done and super impactful. And Andy Wineland's comment about bringing the 8th graders to the nature area and just asking them, like, how many of you guys come here, and having 1 or 2 out of 10 hands get raised. And that but we do have so much already available that's not being used. To me, that really pulled at me and said, like, it's not only having the space, but making sure that that space is accessible and being used. And some of it's right behind a, electrical shop, and I don't think people even know it exists. Like, if that wasn't there, I'd throw a library right against it, and
Please don't just another spot.
No, you know what I mean. Like, it's not my intention.
Jenny, we would like to propose, just kidding.
I'm not proposing that.
No, that's great. I really appreciate those thoughts. And I think you're right that there were very specific things that people brought to the forefront, and really important ideas and really good thoughts, and people really care, and people are really want to be involved, and that's a great place to live, and it's a great place to want to put a library, because we're all about educating the public and creating community and reaching out and being a part of the community. So the fact that we have these discussions and we're able to have this information, I think, is why we all want a library, right? It's all part of growing and creating educated people for the future. So appreciate that. Okay, we are going to ask questions resulting from the listening sessions.
So Carlene, did we want to start, I have some, I included in your packet the questions that the community members wrote on their forums at the listening sessions. We did try to address all of those during the session. But if you have any additional follow-up questions, or as you've been thinking about it and want clarification on any of those, or any other questions, or anything that you heard and you wondered if those comments were accurate or what the background was, we can do that. But let's start with the question Carlene posed earlier and have Jeff respond to that.
Yeah, it's a clarification question. My understanding is that this site, if the whole thing were available, because of the ground conditions, is adequate for supporting a single-story building and parking, but a multi-story building with a load that a library would have would require significant infrastructure work. I don't know the word for it, pilings and things like that, in order to hold that up. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, this site has poor soil conditions, just like the North Main Street site does. North Main Street site, we actually had a portion of the site that was kind of up a hill. This is all low-lying,
Right. Okay.
There'll be water conditions, there'll be poor soils. We may need structural support for foundations. Kind of excludes multi-story building. There's been, maybe you do a 3-story building's been suggested. Well, all those things get to be exponentially harder when you have the poor soils. And if we're talking about the cost of just this site, like when you looked at the parcels combined together, the size of it is similar to the North Main Street site, right? It's like 2.6 acres.
Yeah.
And we're talking about combining senior center, library, the post office, what were kind of the boundaries of when we say this site. That's it. And so if this site is the same size as the North Main Street site, we have all the costs associated with trying to put everything we want to put over there, over here. Plus this site probably has more things going on. So, the cost premium for this site is the same or more than what we were talking about at North Main Street.
If you look at the village campus plan,
Yeah, that's
it
where I
talks in
got
there
that
about
information.
needing structural foundations. It talks in there about, really poor soils. People that have been here a while, the reason the parking lots on that corner is because nothing should be built there, right? Is essentially what the civic campus plan is, and it's what we've been told by multiple different people. Can you build things? Sure, but the cost premiums are like more here than they would be on Main Street when we started being concerned to begin with. Elise, do you want to add something?
Since you brought up the Civic Campus Plan, I just wanted to clarify a couple of things too. I know that was mentioned a lot during the listening sessions. So the sort of latest version of the Civic Campus Plan, the second amendment was adopted, I think, in August of 2018. At that time, the youth center still hadn't found a location, and then Village Hall was still sort of a big question mark. But since that time, the youth center's moved out near the police station. Village Hall is planned to be out on Alpine at the old bank building, and so, it's due for an update anyway. There was also a listening session and sort of a ranking of what do we prioritize having downtown, what are we not as concerned about. There was only 25 people that were part of that meeting, if you kind of compare that with the scale of comments we've received just in this latest round for the library. A lot of those were downtown business owners too, so it's not necessarily representative of all the users of all the community buildings.
Put it on the
and-
marshland.
Right. Yeah. And then I think too, like it does acknowledge, some of the structural issues of the site, but also that there are some options that show kind of on this larger block, some buildings like the bowling alley being purchased, and we could put the senior center here and the library here, and here's how it works with parking, but it doesn't have any green space for either building. It doesn't allow any kind of drive-through, either book drop or drop-off that's safe for seniors. And it actually has inadequate parking for both buildings, plus you're losing, some other facilities that are downtown here, like the post office. So while they might look like they fit on the sheet, if you actually look at it, you realize kind of they end up compromising multiple facilities rather than making one or two buildings that actually work well. It's sort of trying to not fit a square peg into a round hole, but again, like we saw on the North Main Street site, there's just only so many things that can go within so many acres without the cost to make everything fit just become unreasonable.
Can I ask a question as well? So one of the things that, as people were talking about potentially combining the senior center and the library and, moving it to this site, in addition to, I'm hearing that like it's not necessarily viable based on the soil, but also, wouldn't there be an associated cost of where those facilities would operate out of during construction? And do we have an idea of like what kind of a scale that is?
We actually asked, so they had looked when they were trying to talk about where a temporary senior center could go in the village hall.
Okay.
And just to try to make that, my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, is it's about $250,000 to temporarily move
Okay.
them into the village hall with all the ADA considerations and all the things
Sure.
needed to do that. So it's almost another project in itself just to move them there temporarily. We don't know what the impact would be to put a library there, because you look at the structural concerns needed for the bookcases and everything else needed to support a library, plus the ADA concerns and those things. So if we temporarily had to move there, we're assuming it's probably more than that $250,000 to move us to there. And people were losing out on services while that temporarily happens, right? So like your drive-through kitchens and those type of things that the senior centers use, or our book drop, or things like that. So there's just that, I know that costs. I don't know other spots in the village that we would look to do, but that one we have looked at in the past.
That's helpful. I grew up during the time period where the Janesville Hedberg Library moved to a strip mall while they were building their new one. So it's top of mind. But that also makes sense and is something that I guess I just want noted for the community, that it's not an easy, shuffle us off and then shuffle us back.
Just back to the idea of a civic plan. How, and Elise, maybe, I don't know who can provide input on this, but how much is a civic plan influenced by whoever is on the village board at that time?
None.
Like who drives a civic plan? Like who? Obviously, the village board pays for it,
Right.
but then like what happens to gather input, and whose influence creates determines the plan?
Definitely a bit of a loaded question, and I preface this comment with saying I don't think that planning in general holds no value, but I do think that just with any finding any statistics or finding an answer to a question you have, or whatever answer you're trying to find, you can find it if you ask the right questions. So I think at the time when the Civic Campus Plan was done, again, there was a set of understandings that, and options for land that were available at the time that's different than what's available now and what buildings need to be relocated or expanded. And so for that moment in time, given the sites that were available, maybe the approximate budget that the village board thought they could dedicate to capital projects, you know, it was probably reasonable at the time, but it's really just that moment in time that makes sense. It's also, like I mentioned, that plan had pretty limited public comment. There was also a lot of comments in there that weren't really related to municipal buildings downtown at all, but they said, we want our downtown to be a place for people to gather. We love supporting small businesses. We want to see those thrive. We like the we want to preserve our historic buildings, and it really had nothing to do with this is where we want the library, this is where we want Village Hall. So I take a lot of value in comments like that too, that are more broad and can be applied to a lot of different things. And like you mentioned, the comment I brought up about supporting downtowns, really what current urban planning thought is today is that to support downtown activity, you really need to have 24/7 use of the space, and that means housing. So whether it's senior, family, low income, market rate, whatever that might be, having that activity of housing drives a lot more economic development than something like a library that's closed on Sundays and closed in the evenings and is used, more sporadically. So I think that plan, at the time, the North Main Street site wasn't an option. So when that became an option, it's sort of, you said you guys focused in on that site and kind of left all the other, and there's lots of plans that we have that sit on the shelf because they were answering a set of questions that were relevant at the time, but then life happens and you come back to it a couple years later and it might not be that useful anymore.
Can I just add to a little bit of Lisa's saying too, that sometimes people are wondering, well, why was this site pursued if you're kind of where you're at now? And I know many of us joined the board after the site was selected and the kind of the direction was going. So the village did purchase that North Main Street site as part of the Civic Plan to try to keep those municipal buildings downtown. But again, it's a planning, it's a bigger picture thing, and so things like site grading and store management and specific needs like drive-through book drop, and even the parking that was reflected in the code at the time aren't that level of detail. There's just kind of that bigger picture, and so some of those needs weren't fully understood, and so making the best decisions with the information available at the time, trying to keep those priorities and fulfill that plan was kind of the goal. And so that's kind of where there's a little bit of a mismatch between where the board was at then, making that informed decision, and kind of where we are now with that same property, why it seemed like a good idea then, and now we're kind of at a little bit of a different place with different understandings and time and different opportunities. So I just kind of want to have people keep that in mind, because when it's mentioned, I don't want it to seem like our board wasn't considering it, the village board wasn't considering it. They purchased that property, then the opportunity came for the library to choose if they wanted to go there, and so those steps seem really logical when you think about that. But then it's easy to say back, go back and say, well, why was that decision made, or what were they thinking? But if you try to put yourself in their shoes, it makes perfect sense how it kind of went the way it did.
So if I'm hearing right, in the last, I'm thinking of my tenure here on the board is 5 years, right? In the last 5 years, see, I'm looking around the room.
Okay.
Right? There's two of us that have been around. Everybody else has changed over. On the village staff, we have a new administrator. We have new co-workers. At the village hall, or at the village board level, Jerry, I think, was maybe the only person around 5 years ago. I don't know. I think I might be misspeaking on that. What's that?
Maybe Amanda.
Maybe Amanda, yeah.
She joined right about that time. At the community, at the what's available level, like it's a very different. I think that's worth just mentioning because a lot of people have referred back to that civic plan saying, you guys aren't following it and you're not informed, or those things kind of hurt a little bit, because I think we are informed. But I appreciate like to talk about the circumstances of change. We need to make decisions based on the circumstances of now,
Existing,
not
right.
based on what people thought the circumstances were before. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges of us, and like the challenges of the village board to do is to not rely on that. It's a good reference point, but we need to understand the context, and that context is what we just talked about. It's maybe not as meaningful as some try to make it be.
Is there other questions or Jeff?
Well, I just wanted to add a couple of points. Just from things that we heard through the listening, there was a lot of questions about this site, and we're talking about combining, the couple pieces of property here, and potentially combining with the senior center as well. So the first comment is if you take North Main Street site, and I think everybody's now kind of well versed on how we don't fit there, right? So now ask the question, well, should we combine with the senior center at North Main Street? And the answer would be, well, that doesn't make any sense. Well, if we have 2.6 acres here, we already have those types of site costs, and there's not enough room for us then to combine with the senior center here. It still doesn't make sense. It doesn't fit. And so you could find ways to do that and have extraordinary costs to be able to do it. You could build a multi-story building, you could build underground parking, you could do these other things. But back to the comment about revitalizing the downtown and what helps drive that, of having housing of some sort. When you build that large unit housing, those buildings generate a lot of revenue. And so that type of development can afford a lot of things that a library and a senior center that don't have revenue can't afford. And a library and a senior center aren't paying a large tax increment either. So, if people are talking about, hey, and everybody up and down the line is very supportive of keeping a downtown vital and improving it and having growth and all these wonderful things. But, like Elisa's saying, there's other ways to do that. Keeping the library here may not be the best way to do that. There might be other ways that are better. And those ways might have revenue and, ways to deal with the extraordinary construction costs that might be in whatever area to do that. So I just wanted to kind of close the loop on
Okay,
that idea here.
so if I'm hearing you right, you've answered the one question that I wanted to nail down. And to preface this, your discussion reminds me way back of the original visioning sessions we did. They showed us the properties that the village had, and they gave us blocks. And they said you can only use so many blocks for each space, so that you could see what the space constraints were. And back then, we had concluded that you could not put the library and the senior center in this block.
Yep.
And so if I'm hearing you correctly, that's still true.
That's correct.
And so the basic problem is that you can have your senior center downtown, or you can have the library downtown, but you really can't have both.
So
And I would preface that with,
You can do anything, sorry.
Uh-huh.
It's the cost and it's the sacrifices being willing to be made to make that happen.
I also took time. I was also
And
gonna
time,
say,
yeah.
ongoing cost is critical as well, because,
Right,
Laura
because
and I
when-
work on the, I can't think of words, but, the staffing committee, whatever we do, that we do. Personnel committee. And there's an ongoing cost that we add, like, if we go up, right, like, that seems like one of those things that feels easy to throw out there. Well, let's just build a 3-story library. But the more stories you create, the more staff you have to have on staff at all times, because you
have to
cannot
have people on each floor.
Right, because you can't have somebody just chilling by themselves.
And you have to have an elevator.
Yes, so there just are other costs too. And again, anything is possible, but we also have to think about the fact that our operating budget is not magically going to get huge if we choose to build a 3-story library, right? That is an ongoing cost to the community that we don't have a way to fund necessarily. Thank you for the words. My goodness.
So the other thing somebody alluded to is the senior center timeline, and I had a nice conversation with Rachel trying to make sure I wouldn't misrepresent any of the senior center needs that are meeting here tonight, and ask what is their current timeline. So the way they're planning is they kind of had some of the assumptions we had, that the library was going to go North Main, that they would take over the village property here, expand. They really want to be on one level if they can for safety for the population they serve. They have meal deliveries that are very efficient, that they want to be able to have, a covered entrance for seniors with mobility issues. They want to be able to have those meal deliveries and have volunteers be able to pick those up readily without having to go up and down elevators. And those same kinds of priorities apply to the library. If we check in 400,000 plus items a year, every time you're having to take those from floor to floor and move them around is less efficient in terms of staff. So there's some competing priorities that we both want to have. We want to have a drive-through book drop, and we also want to have a pickup window with COVID. It's nice to be able to have that option. Should health situations get worse, or just as a convenience. And so, there's some priorities that we both kind of want, and if we work together, that might not be feasible or functional. It's not just about putting the same number of square feet, but you have to lay out in a way that's functional for both facilities. And it meets both of those needs, and that's kind of a challenge. There's some spaces we could share, maybe a break room, or there's elevator or mechanical space that would be shared and be used by both facilities, but you have to think about what the impacts are in both operations.
Two separate drive-throughs would be insanity.
And honestly, that's what I mean when I'm talking about possibilities, because we have a budget, and there's people in the village that don't think we should be spending as much as we're already asking to spend on the library, So it is not reasonably feasible
No, I'm with you. I just wanna make
to
sure
put
that
them
we're not.
both in the same spot. So it really is a matter of what, since you can't do everything you want, how are you going to prioritize?
So Carrie had shared some other great questions before the meeting, and I just want to run through
Go right ahead.
those that we haven't talked about to make sure everybody has the benefit of hearing
Sure.
what those were. One was she wanted to know what the village plan for the old village hall space. Elise, I don't know if you want to respond to that.
Again, right now, there's no adopted plan. It's, initially it was thought that it could be a temporary space, and after looking at it further, the reason that we're moving out is because it's in such poor condition and not accessible. The same would be true of any other community facility using that. It's obviously really valuable real estate near downtown, and that would be a decision for either this board or a future board, depending on how long they want to hold on to it. Is that something they want to sell to a developer for redevelopment? Does the fire station need to expand? Would that make sense there? Do we want more downtown green space? Do we need more downtown parking? Any of those things are possibilities. I think I would imagine the village board would probably kind of wait and see how the dust settles with the library site and the senior center site, and see if that's even needed to be used for storage or something, the short term. And then make a decision from there as to what the future of that building will be. But the mortgage is paid off, it's not going anywhere, so.
Yeah, and one of the reasons that I asked that is because somebody had thrown out the idea of, well, why can't the senior center take that spot, And which, I mean, first of all, because it's not one story, it kind of doesn't make sense, but.
Right, the addition.
It seems like.
The newer addition was 1988 or so, 3 years before ADA was adopted, and so.
It's probably the least accessible building
Of all,
in
yeah.
the area. Let's take
Half
the
of it
senior.
is undergrade, the ramps are like, ski jumps, so if you don't want to be.
Thank you.
You can't walk in the building without hitting stairs.
Yeah.
Right, yeah,
I
that's
mean-
what we
Yeah, you
talked
have
about,
to,
is you
yeah.
don't want it, and it's like the adult day program that the senior center has is some of the frailest of the frail is, a respite program for caregivers, and so to think about, oh my gosh, if you had a fire or flood and taking people in wheelchairs upstairs, and it was just, you said there's a cost associated with that. Anything can be done with infinite time, money, resources, engineering, all of that, but is that really the best use of public funds to renovate something that may only be functional for a year or two, and then somebody comes in and knocks it down?
Right.
So another thing Carrie asked about was the post office lease. The village lease with the post office does go through summer of '22. Jeff Rouse said they anticipate that they'll want to renew it, that they are not aware of any specific plans for the post office to relocate. I'm gonna let Elise add if she knows any more than I do.
Just that, we think the village bureaucracy is complicated. There's federal government level, the post office. I know the
Right,
postmaster locally here, she's come to some different public meetings actually and said, we really need a new space. We've totally outgrown our old space. We really appreciate the village, giving us the space that's available, but I think this site would be great, or the site, and she got reprimanded by her upper management. You don't have the authority to speak like that, but the people that are in charge of post office real estate are in Washington DC and could care less about our little village. So I do know that the post office operations here kind of have two pieces. So one is the front office counter, your PO boxes, you're buying your stamps, you're dropping off your packages, and there's kind of a distribution center operations in the back, and that's where they send out all the trucks and all that. I don't believe that those have to stay in the same place, and I think having the post office near a center of activity is a good thing. It drives a lot of traffic and a lot of people, coming to do errands and everything. So that's something we're having ongoing conversations with the post office, but it's a little bit out of our hands because the decision makers are, not really invested in our community and don't understand all the different, situations we find ourselves in the places that are available.
The other question Carrie asked was about Belgreen Acre Park as a possible solution, and to elaborate a little bit on what was said in the listening session and make sure we all have a common understanding. It's a neighborhood park, and those are established as part of a subdivision covenant, which means it's specifically dedicated for park use. So whether or not it could be used for another purpose is kind of a legal question that would have to be pursued, legally to see if it could be used for another use. The public works director also said it's a lowland area with a history of flooding, and so not ideal for those reasons.
The dog park.
Yeah.
Pick a spot and then
Yeah.
that's probably.
Well,
If
true.
there's a park there, it's probably because it floods.
It often floods.
Probably, yeah.
Jennifer, one comment I would just make and maybe challenge people to think about community facilities in a different way is, so our parks, for example, our neighborhood parks, all in new neighborhoods have dedication of parkland, or they pay fees in lieu of parkland dedication, and then we use that money to buy parkland elsewhere. But those are spread out across the community, and the idea is that every family has a walkable park within their neighborhood. I think maybe the same thing could be thought about of community facilities as a whole, so that our not only parks and trails, but maybe a senior center, a library, or village hall are, they could be distributed across the community much like our parks are, because, some things are gonna be closer for some people and some are gonna be, further from others. I might not live close to the awesome sledding hill at the high school, but I have, I live close to Kelly Alpine Meadows and enjoy using that with my family, but I'm gonna go drive to the dog park. We have these facilities distributed around because they're accessible to people, kind of finding people where they are.
So nobody gets everything and nobody gets nothing. Right.
Everyone gets a little something.
That's a great solution. Yeah.
So another question Carrie asked related to the Civic Campus Plan is the Oregon Bowl and what that would mean in terms of size if that property could be acquired. And so there's two parcels that the bowling alley owns between Frontier and the Masonic Lodge. It's the bowl itself and then kind of a little green space parking area. So those properties combined are about 0.7 acres. And they have an assessed value of just over $390,000. So if they were interested in selling, the purchase price would likely be around that neighborhood. So the current village-owned property, including Waterman Street that we talked about, the senior center, post office, library, is 2.6 acres. So if you added those together, you'd be at 3.3.
So you're still under the 4 acres that would be.
And then I think Carrie, let me know if there's any other questions I skipped, but I think the last question Carrie asked was kind of about donors and just concern about if any donors said that they would want their money back if the library went to a certain site. I just want to make sure you're aware that we did issue one refund at a previous board meeting to a donor who didn't wish to elaborate on the reason other than just to request a refund. We do have a set of donors that made a donation in August specifically because a close family tied to the North Main Street site and really stretched their donation, and they may wish to revisit that if a different site's chosen, which is perfectly understandable. And then we do have a donor who's chosen to pause their pledge payments until we know what the future of the project is. But nobody else has specifically said that they'd like a refund if a specific site were to be chosen. And then the town of Oregon has been generously including funding for the library in their budgets over the past 2 years. They decided to pause for 2022, but they're not going back on any commitment they've made. They're just pausing again to reevaluate once future plans are known. So it's not to say we might not get refund requests for people if they have a strong opinion on the site and a different site is chosen. It just means that to date, that's kind of what we've heard. We've also made a really strong effort to try to communicate with donors to the extent possible. It's not, we have over 800 donors, so I can't personally email everybody every single time, but we have really tried to reach out, especially to those who've been involved to a more strong extent, and just to be very clear in all publicity, whether it to be a donor or a community member, that we're happy to talk, and putting Jenny and my contact information there to make sure we're accessible for people with questions. Some folks have taken us up on the offer to meet with them in person and listen to their concerns and share information. Others have just asked for updates, and we're trying to meet people where they are, whether they come into the library or call or email, and happy to talk to and listen to people however they want to share those concerns or questions. Are there any other questions people had about
So Jennifer, I have a question actually for the group. So, we're gonna go into the village board meeting, like these guys talked about in the beginning. It's not like we're gonna vote and take a recommendation. But what we do wanna ask is through everything that you've heard and all of these listening sessions and everything in the last few months, has it changed what this group thinks the priorities are for the new library? So that's one question. Like, everything that you heard and envisioned and thought should be included, and the spaces that were planned, has any of what's gone on with the community feedback changed your mind on that, or do you still think those are the priorities? And then, do you think that at some point there's areas that you'd be willing to compromise or maybe drastically reduce to try to figure out how to change that vision to fit somewhere? Or, so I guess I'm wondering
Can
what
I
people's
answer
thoughts
first?
are on that.
I'm going
Since
to say
I've
we're
been-
going to letter C next, so just so we're following the agenda. So
Oh.
What was that?
Good segue to letter.
C
Okay.
needs in.
Right, and I think it would be helpful to review those, but since I've been here forever, I just want to say that from my point of view, nothing that anybody has said in any of the listening sessions, well, there was a couple people that said scale back, but most people were not attacking the original vision for the library. I feel like, we spent a lot of time getting that from the community, and people felt really strongly about it, and I think the village was really supportive of it all along, and I wouldn't want to change that now. I don't see anything from what we got that we should change it, and I'm really strongly opposed to scaling it back because, again, going back to the history of the library that we have, it was scaled back when it was built, and it was a problem from the beginning, and from the beginning when I served on the library board, that was one of the first things I heard was, oh, the morale here is terrible, this building, it was not built right, it's always been a problem, and we don't want to do that again. So that's my 2 cents, or 10 cents.
I had a point, and I can't remember what it was. So the first point is about scaling back is most likely the numbers we're working with are from 2 years ago, and it was been pretty clear that the money that we have available is what we have to spend. One thing is just to be aware that the budget numbers we're working on have been greatly impacted by COVID and just the market, and so it's likely that day one we're gonna have to make some tough decisions about what to cut back on to begin with. But if we're able to do that in a way that's smart and positions us for the future, that's obviously to the benefit of the folks that sit in our chairs after us. The other thing is that we have some limitations to what we can remove in terms of amenities. The number of the spaces in the library were sponsored by donors. And so if they donated significantly with the intent of a naming opportunity, if we choose to eliminate that space, and then they gave money for that specific space, and we need to have a conversation with them about, can we use that money for another space, or do we need to return it to them because of the expectation and how that was given? So I just want to make sure that you're aware of that as well. Go ahead.
So I have a concern about talking about scaling back before we've made a decision about where the library will be. Because I think where the library will be greatly impacts the cost of building the library. And so I hesitate to say, well, we cut this or well, we cut that, because I think that then there will be some people that will say, well, you said you would cut that.
Right.
And I think that's a really bad precedent. I would strongly encourage making a decision on a site. Sorry, oh, that's my husband's medicine. I'll have to call him. Sorry. I just realized that he's there by himself. Okay, let me regroup.
Sure.
Sorry, that's
You're
really...
talking about not
Right,
proactively
so I
making
just think that
suggestions.
we need a site, and we need to know how much will go into prepping that site, and what kinds of cutbacks we would need to make. That I would
And
strongly
what I was
encourage.
getting at is, I think it's important that the village board hears through tonight's meeting that the priorities haven't drastically changed through the listing process, and that we still are looking for a site that has to serve all of these things, all of this programming, all of these spaces. You know, there were some comments, and it was the people that were new to the party and less
Process.
educated that
Right.
said, well, it sounds like you guys
Right.
need to figure out
Right.
what you need or
What you
want.
want.
And the answer to that is, we know exactly what we need and want. We
Mhm.
actually have a plan. We actually have a conceptual plan for the building that fits all those needs and wants. And we know how much
Mhm.
space it takes, and we know how much land it takes. So, you know, we don't need to go back to square one.
Right.
And if everybody's still on board with the fact that that's the vision, and that's what the community and the library needs, and those are the priorities, well, then I would like to take that answer when we go to the village board to say, hey, we're still looking for something that's this big and this wide, and, you know, that fits all of this vision. So,
I actually think it would be, for those people who are late to the party, as you say, to revisit what came out of those listening sessions in a way that just, like, maybe OCA Media can play it on a rolling video that says, if you want to know what came out of that,
Maybe there can be a link on the library.
those listening
website.
sessions and visioning, so that
here's the
people-
last 15 years worth of
Right,
notes.
exactly,
Yes,
because
exactly.
when you look at that and you think about the things that we're talking about, it's pretty remarkable.
We did, OCA Media is doing an Oregon Minute segment again. They just restarted that with Tom Kirchdorfer as the host, and they did invite us to talk about the new library and why we needed the library. So they recently aired that about 2 weeks ago for us, so that is available on YouTube for the community, and we can maybe do a little bit better job of sharing that as well. Are we on C now, or, okay.
Can I just comment?
Yeah.
I agree with what we're saying in the sense that the listening sessions have not been about the library and how it's going to be used and how it's going to function. Like, that was not what we were listening to. It was where it should go,
Right.
not what it should do. And so, in my opinion, there was nothing there that would have changed my mind. And the only thing that has happened in the last couple of years that's changed my mind has been this worldwide pandemic and everything that has related around, which in my mind has made libraries more valuable. I think equity is, you know, even further on people's minds. I think people that don't have access or do have access, I think, you know, there's been changes there. I think the library is incredibly valuable. I don't think that you can do away with any of the things that we've talked about and still have a library that's as valuable to the community as the one that we started with.
I've been trying to describe to people my beliefs the more that I think about this. I try to tell them the library's a verb, right? It's an action word. It's people out in the community. It's people coming and getting services. It's a verb, and what we've been listening to and talking about lately is a noun, a building. right? Where does a building go? And so that's what I think we need to help communicate, to help the village board understand a little bit more the space that we need, the ability that we need to be able to do the library, right? Do the verb of the library and what they're doing. I don't know how else to describe it besides that, but I think that's kind of my vision is, I brought some pictures. I don't know a lot of you, if you've been in the library recently, I know a lot of people stop, grab their books, they, but I have some pictures that I'm gonna share, and I'll maybe send them to the village board as well, but they're pictures of the library staff trying to do their job right now. And so I have a packet that I printed out, and part of what I think the library is a space to let the librarians do them, right? It's all the community outreach, it's all of the space and the materials that they need to do what they do. And so right now, we're struggling with even having spaces for people to come to the library, right?
Thank you.
It's, the Sue Ames room is office space so that the employees can do their jobs and not sit on top of each other. You can see on top of the bookshelves where all of Kelly's tubs are being stored, right? With the stuff that she has to be able to take down and take somewhere else to do her programs. These are, there's the Sue Ames room has where the pages are working and they share their space. And it's just the ability to, the children's area is one couch right now, right? And so if we don't get the new library built, we don't get this space that we need for the librarians to do their jobs, to do the library, it worries me that it's just, we're not providing the services that we should be and that we can because they don't have the space to do their jobs. And it makes me think the library is even more important than it ever was before because, it's great that the school district can give us a space to do story time at 10 a.m. But then those kids, their parents are probably taking them home, right? They're not exploring the library afterwards. They're not getting that same time, that same story time that everybody remembers and everybody loves, right? If we're having Zumba at 10 a.m. and we're having story time at the same time at the senior center, right? Is that fair to the seniors who are now listening to the little kids, right? So it's not just getting the building built and doing it. It's all the programs and all of the things that it could be, right? I went to a conference out in Nashville for a healthcare conference, and they, out east more and more, in order to help equity, they're providing spaces that you can do your televisits, right, with your doctor, because you can't get to a doctor, you can't do things, but the library has internet, right, and they have somebody that could show you how to log on, and you have a private space to do it, right? That's a study room for us. Or they team up with local healthcare providers that once a week come in. A lot of the Google searches at the library are medical terms, right? Trying to understand what's wrong with them or their loved ones, what can I do? So they team up with the local healthcare community to have somebody there once a week, once a month, right? These are all things that if you have the space, it's an infinite possibility, right? And I think that's what we all want to make people understand, and what I want people to understand is it's not just a place for books. It's not just a place to go pick up your book and leave. It's a place to be. It's a place that the librarians can open up opportunities that you can't do when you have just a building, right? So that's my needs, that's my vision, and that's what I've been hearing. That's what I heard in the listening sessions. I heard people that want a place that they can be, that encourages community, that encourages us to be Oregon. And that's what I want to build, and that's what I want to help at the library, at the village board meeting. That's what I want to help them understand, is we're building a verb. We want a verb.
So it's not a building, it's a vision.
Yeah.
It's a vision for how we serve the community.
Mm-hmm.
And that always has to come first in any setting that we're talking about this, whether it's the village board meeting or the listening sessions or whatever other thing we go through. It has to be first about what is the vision for how we want to serve the community. the building comes after that.
Right.
It's vision first. And I completely agree with what people have said. The listening sessions were really important, but they didn't influence the vision. They just were about the best place for the vision to happen.
Could I just add that, yes, I agree with everything everyone has said, but I would like to say the growing community.
Yes.
The community
Amen.
is only getting bigger, and the people we want to reach is getting infinitely larger.
Yes.
I feel like as a community, or as a, let's start with like, as a village board, I think we have been expressing this need. I think the way you're talking about it is beautiful, Jenny, because I do agree that it is a verb. And I think we have, as far as I can tell, very clearly articulated to the village what kind of space we need in order to accomplish what our community needs. And I think a lot of what we have been saying as a group is we need 4.5 acres, right? Like, let's be practical about it and say, the gut feel is we need 4.5 acres in order to accomplish what our community needs. And when I'm thinking too, I love the pictures as well, it's a helpful visual. We also are an employer, right? And when I think about the work that we are doing to make equitable wages for our librarians and for our wider library staff, I also have to think about the fact that in one of our exit interviews that we did over the course of, I don't know, sometime in the pandemic, there was an express concern that the thing that this person was the happiest to leave behind was having a desk in a hallway and essentially working in a hallway. And that is not a way for an employer of a growing community to provide a workspace. And I think that those pictures really highlight that. I think it will be difficult for us to find people to staff our library if our library does not continue to be a place where we are striving to have decent just workplace. I can't even think of like the right word, but yeah, it's like the ambiance a little bit, right? I'm sure working at the village hall is a delight.
A healthy environment.
Right.
Yeah.
I'd like to make sure that we are pushing in a direction that people want to come to work because they're serving our community in this huge and meaningful way. So.
And I just want to circle back to your comment, because to a certain extent, yes, we're going to go meet with the village board and the community has spoke and the village board has to make tough decisions, and at some point there's certain sites that are going to be available. But put that aside from the, I think it's okay for the library board to say from the library's perspective, what's important to the library? What does the library need to serve the community and to have this facility and to do all of these things? Everything that Jenny mentioned, it's basically going to be a community center. It's going to be this third place. There's going to be all kinds of things happening and going on in that building that are all these wonderful things. And from the library's perspective, you know, where are the best places, or where's the best place to be able to have that happen? And you should express that this is, if we're just talking about how does the library serve its purpose and serve the community and achieve the vision, well then, you know, this is what we need. Now, it might be that that's not possible, and there are other priorities, and there's lots of other people with different perspectives. But let them have their perspectives. I think the library board needs to figure out what their perspective is and make that known, or at least be ready at the time to say, you know, here's what will get us to where we should go, because that's our priority.
Mike, are we allowed to call her? Probably.
I don't know, it's her meeting. So.
My meeting, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Mike Wentz, I'm a village trustee. If you do not make a position on where you want the library, I guarantee you I will put you on the spot on Monday and ask you which of these spots will work to meet the function of the library. if you can't advocate for what's best for the library, who the heck else is gonna do it?
Right.
And when you look at the costs of fixing the property or fixing the soil here, moving the senior center, moving the library, delaying the building of the library for several years while the senior center and the library get their act together of what they're gonna build together, at 6% inflation, you're losing millions of dollars of library. If that does not deliver the library that you want, you need to tell us that that's not gonna work and what it's gonna cost the community. So that's my 2 cents, but
Thank you.
I will put you on the spot if you don't.
Totally fair.
Be warned.
Take some notes. Are there other visions or things that we want to make sure that we're explaining at that meeting on Monday? I think that we all have an idea, we all have, the initial ideas and visions. I just want to make sure, is there anything, kind of what Jeff asked, is there anything different that has happened recently or anything that we want to add to our vision or we want to, is there anything else that way coming?
I wonder a couple of things. So Jeff presented to this board the pros and cons of all the sites that had been presented, and which led us to kind of down this path. And I wonder if all of the board members have had that information. I have, I know Mike has seen it, I know Amanda has because she's on the library building committee, but have all the other board members? So that's one question I have. A second question I have is, or a suggestion, this is a suggestion I have, is to send that packet to that OPN did, the summary of the visioning.
So you mean this big one?
I don't know, I have it on my
The giant
computer.
PDF that you all had, that
Yeah.
talks about our needs and our programs
Yeah,
and
I
things?
would make sure that every village board member has that. And Jenny, I'd put together some captions with those pictures that
Help tell the
that
story.
that tell the story of what these pictures are, and send those to the village board as well. Because I'm right there with Mike. I think that we as a board know what the library needs, and while the village board will make the final decision about where things go, this board needs to be able to advocate for a space.
And to back up to your first part, so the only site that we've actually done the deep dive on and done the pros and cons and really studied it is North Main Street.
But
So-
wasn't there civic campus work done here to?
There was some, yeah.
Mhm.
but
Yeah, there's
none
lots
to
of
the-
information, and
there's
in our
not
listening
building.
sessions, we've been presenting 12, 15 different possibilities that anybody that has ever been able to come up with. What we're
Right,
hoping.
but all the pros and cons haven't been
Correct.
spelled out on those.
So
I
what
think
we're
that
hoping
those
for
are
is when we
important.
get through this next village board meeting, that there will be some sort of focus, and then we'll be happy to go back and
So-
dive in and get whatever information's requested and do all of that work. But we need to have direction on,
So I think part of what we want to get out of Monday's meeting from the village board is what 3 sites do you want us to do that deep dive into? From all the listening sessions that you've had, there was 25 sites. We want the village board to tell us, these are the 3 sites that we heard make the most sense. Do your due diligence, do pros and cons, tell us, and then I talked to Randy earlier, we also are gonna ask, I think, for what the next steps are, right? What information do you need to be able to make a decision? And then is that the next board meeting, is that a month from now? So that's what I'm hoping to get out of that with our joint meeting next week, is to say, what sites village board do you wanna do before we have a lot of the information you're looking for, Carlene, don't get me wrong.
Mhm.
But before we take it and go full forward into it, we wanna make sure we're not assuming something that the village board isn't gonna want or need. Maybe they go, well, we
I
already
think
know Main
sometimes the village
Street.
board doesn't know what they don't know. And because the library board has been studying this for a while, a long while, that the library board knows more what the village board needs to know about being able to make a decision.
Well, that's back to what we were talking about before. All of you people can email village board members too, or call them, or talk to them, or express your individual concern, or what you think we should be focusing on. I mean, certainly, let's get your opinions out before we go to the meeting to decide what we're gonna study.
But I'm the village board rep, I'm right there with
Yeah.
them, right? I'm saying this from the village board perspective. I think these are some of the things that my village board colleagues need
Yeah.
in order to make an informed decision about what they need to, what more they need to know.
Awesome, I don't want to cut that short, but and you've got momentum, I get that. But just two things that have come to my mind that I just want to throw out there. One is what's changed in the last couple of years. I think the one thing that I would add to the vision is an HVAC system that is like, you know, circulating air, cleaning air, because COVID's not going away, and we don't want our community to be shying away from this expensive, you know, resource because of something that we did. That's a minimal investment. Okay, so one thing. The second thing, if they're asking us to like say what are the favorites or what, are we at the point where we can, as a consensus, say, well, it's definitely not North Main Street?
I think,
Yes.
I think
Is
we
that the
have
one-
to say the amount of space we want, and the amount of space we want is 4.5 acres. And so North Main is not 4.5 acres, we're gonna have to set that one aside.
Yeah.
Here is not 4.5 acres, we're gonna have to set that one aside, so that's where I'm struggling with. Do we have more options that are 4.5 acres?
Right.
Cause
I'm
I'm
not
feeling
hearing
like
any.
we're having this discussion, but like, the reality is, if we take that list of potential sites and we take everything off of it that does not have the size requirement that we as a library board are agreeing is necessary, then there's our limited options. And I think we can say to the village, like, what are we missing here? Like, is there something else? But I don't think that we can go and say, okay, I'm happy to take a look at these 3 sites, 2 of which we already know are not big enough.
Right, that's why I asked about Bethel Acre,
Sorry.
because that was the only other place, that was the only other option that was presented that I saw that was more than 4 acres.
And it's only 4 acres, by the way, it's not 4.5.
Oh,
But
okay.
I like your style. We can get an extra half acre, we'll take it.
Yeah, I need a separate half an acre just for me.
Yeah, well, just to add to the site, so, you know, there was publicly owned sites or privately owned sites. There are parks that were mentioned that are larger, but they all come with caveats of the same soil issues and things that we've mentioned before, or they're tied up with neighborhood covenants and all those things.
Or other
the-
plans.
Right, the only private site that I think had the size that isn't already currently being used would be the leased family site on Netherwood. There's a cost that comes with that, we have no idea what that is, we're not even sure if it's available.
Timeline.
The timeline of when that could be available, is that even a location that makes sense to serve library patrons? So there might be a couple options, and if we're gonna use the acreage kind of criteria to clear stuff out, then like if that's what you guys wanna do, let's do it, let's whittle it down. I'm all for not continuing to beat a dead horse with sites that we know aren't
Right.
gonna work,
Yeah.
and
That's
let's
right
move
there.
forward with helpful, you know, options.
Let's get to the question of delay a little bit, because there's two, I just thought of another way of delay, right? Because we were thinking when we were kind of studying, well, what if we partner with the senior center, there's gonna be this long planning process of delay. But there could be delay on plenty of other sites too. If we're trying to assemble 3 different properties that are owned by other parties, it's like, how long does that deal take? Or with the unknown timeline with the lease property. So just to give everybody an idea, you know, you said 6% per year inflation. The first year and now actually, like at this very moment, the biggest increase in construction costs is going on now and probably will go on over the next 12 to 24 months. That's happened in my entire 33-year construction career. So it's like, time is definitely of the essence here. So if we took our entire library budget and extrapolated all of the normal stuff by, let's say, 5%, but then took the construction related things, and I think it's more realistic from now, if we delayed an entire year, that those construction costs would be at 8%. So you can do some math, and that's almost $1 million for year 1. And then year two, maybe those construction escalation numbers come back towards normal a little bit. So we did year two at everything's only 5%. And, you know, that's $700,000. So in 2 years, it's $1.5 million. Forget about site-specific costs for sites that have problems. Forget about moving to a temporary facility and having to remodel it and spend money on design and all of that stuff. So it's like very quickly, you go from $1 million to $2 million to north of $2 million if we don't find a way to keep moving forward. So that has to be into the equation as well, is that pretty soon the escalation cost starts stripping your ability to continue to fundraise at this point.
Right.
And you know, you can never catch it. So I just wanted to get that out there, that it's important to find something that's reasonably readily available.
So are we making a list of things like 4 acres needs to be built on in the next, you know, needs to be available now, needs to, that, I know there's not, I mean, the reality is we're dancing around the right answer.
Right.
Like, we are.
We only have one true viable option.
We do.
I know. And I think that's difficult given the community feedback that is in front of us about that space. And as a library board, I struggle with like what other viable options have been put in front of us.
Go ahead.
Carlene, sorry.
No, I think it's really important to acknowledge and honor that there are people who really have expressed an explicit interest or opposition to the Keller Alpine Meadows site.
Yes.
Not everybody has done that. There have been people who think that that's a good site and think that the environmental enhancement that could happen on that site is actually a value added to the site versus a value diminished. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is, I think Susan Shedovy actually said it the best, that site's gonna be developed in village planning in the future. This is not gonna be the only village board, and it just seems to me that if we think in terms of the future and we think in terms of the now, that is not only the most viable site, but it makes a lot of sense on a multitude of levels for sustainability, for environmental enhancement, for environmental education, for conservation, for sustainability of a building. I mean, the list is long. So, I think that the elephant is there,
Right.
Okay, I'm going to name it. I think that that's the best site, and I think that we should advocate for it.
I have to agree. I mean, I've been walking those parks, Lerner and Keller Alpine, since I've lived here we moved here in '99. I'm a nature girl. I joined the Nature Alliance shortly before all this stuff happened for other reasons, other things I would like to see happen in the village. But if that site had been available when we were first looking for a spot for the library, we would have all jumped at it. It's just the most ideal site, aside from the fact that it's the only site that meets our needs. It's on a heavily traveled road. It's always been earmarked for development. And putting the library there would be the best way to stop it from being overdeveloped, I was against having Gorman buy it for apartments, oh my gosh, but the library would be the best way to save it. And I think that we have a duty to advocate for the best thing for the library. And we shouldn't shy away from saying so.
I think there's a risk of not saying so.
Exactly.
There might be a perception that we're not behind it. Like it's the obvious choice, and we're not standing behind the obvious choice. So maybe the village or the library board isn't convinced, or they're hesitating.
Yeah, and the other thing I want to point out is that Carlene mentioned not everybody's opposed to it. You always get a small group of people that have strong voices, but we're not hearing everybody in the village. And the people that are in favor of the site come from all ends of the political spectrum, which I also think is interesting. You know, to me, that speaks for it, you know, more than the small group that's against it.
So, go ahead, please.
Oh, just two things to add. You're mentioning, you know, that site had that site at Keller Alpine Meadows been available when the library was earlier in the process, maybe that would have risen to the top and we would have a library open by now. But just to go back to like the Civic Campus Plan, it's a moment in time with what's available, with questions being asked at that time. Had that site been available from the school district 3 years ago, again, the conversation could be a lot different. I think the other comment that I heard, the big concern about placing a library at Keller Alpine Meadows, one was the environmental sustainability factor, which I think we have a lot of good responses on how that could actually be improved. I think the other one was accessibility and sort of equity and access. And one thing I was really impressed by at the early October library board meeting that you all had when Kelly and Kara shared, but they're already the library is doing so much verbing the library out in the community, bringing the library to people. And I think by saying, oh, the library is only accessed in this one, you know, address is actually kind of extremely demeaning to the work the library is already doing and overlooking the amount of services and programs that are happening in the community, meeting people where they are. And I think you guys expressed clearly that would continue regardless of where the library is. Also just noting that there's a lot of ways that the library can be accessed and maybe having on a more heavily traveled road with a site that allows actually better, you know, handicap access and safer book drop area and pedestrian crossing because you're not working within such a tight box could actually improve the physical, you know, kind of traditional accessibility that you think about. Also, we, you know, presented some data about where do all the children live, how many households, how many seniors. There's, you know, the Keller Alpine Meadows site is near 2 daycares, a planned affordable housing location, rentals that are already there, park system that's already in place. There's seniors, there's actually more kids that live in a radius by the Keller Alpine Meadows site than do downtown or North Main Street. So to say that it's inaccessible, I think is extremely short-sighted a statement to make.
I think it's inaccessible to a group of people that has been used to where it is. One of the things I've been thinking about since that October meeting has been, okay, so let's look at COVID and let's look at what our library has been doing during COVID and like how we have had to be very creative about space and how we use in-person anything. And, you know, the library having story times at school locations right now, like those are things that can continue. Those are things that are not impeded by us choosing a location. And one of the things I struggle with when I am looking at this decision in front of us is it better to have an accessible library that does not meet our community's needs or a library that is in a new location that does meet our community's needs? And like that's kind of where the struggle for me is, because I think we have to meet our community's needs and then continue to push for accessibility in a wider variety of ways potentially.
I joined this board because equity was one of the things on my mind. Like,
yes.
And building a library, I wanted to make sure that I could, you know, be part of these conversations. It's really interesting to me. We talked about earlier that the parks are spread out around the community, right? There isn't, this guy doesn't have a huge park and this guy has no parks, right? They spread it out. And the same thing with any developer. There has to be low-income housing developed, and there has to, you know, the village has said you can't just go build McMansions over here. If you want to build some McMansions, we got to have some, you know, duplexes or triplexes or apartments. Like, it is going to continue to be spread out. I just wanted to make the point, like, there is no place in town that is the equity place, and there is no place in town that's not the equity place. And especially as this town continues to grow, I feel like that was kind of glammed down. Like somebody said that, and people glommed onto that idea. But the more I think about it, I don't think that there's a reality of, you know, you put this here and people who don't have access to it now have access to it. I think you're taking or you're giving, no matter where you give it.
Yep,
where you put it.
and I fully agree with everything you said, Kyle, and I think that we will continue to advocate for that equity regardless
Right.
of where the
Yes.
building ends up.
Yeah.
Because I think we can come up with ways, and I know our librarians are fantastic and can come up with more ways than they already have.
Yeah.
So I think that regardless of where the building is, we will ensure that there is equitable access to
Yep.
every member of our community.
I love that.
Agreed.
I think we can,
Yeah,
I mean-
that's one thing the board's always agreed on.
yeah,
Right.
we could say right now, like, do we want to vote on that? And everybody be like, yes, that's it. You know, there'd be no, I doubt that there'd be any dissension on that.
I have two things. First, I think we have a transportation issue in this village, and that's a different issue that is not the library board's, you know, responsibility. It is the village board's responsibility, and there is a transportation committee that is being started. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, I have a standing meeting at 7 o'clock, a monthly team leaders meeting on Zoom that I facilitate, so I have to go. But it's lovely to actually see all of you in person. Oh my gosh, and thank you. Thank you so much.
Do you have any parting words? Our next agenda item is to talk about approaching the joint meeting. Do you have any
I think
words
we
of
need to
wisdom on
go
that?
in there with a site in mind and say, this is what we think we need. And that's, you know, I said that before. I mean, I think we need to advocate for what we need, and I totally agree with you that 4 acres is the minimum, and we know where that is. And I personally think it's a great site, for all the reasons I already said.
Thanks,
Thanks, Carly.
All right, good night, you guys, and thank you
Good
so
luck with
much.
your husband. I hope he does.
Yes, I had a red.
Yeah, I texted him and said, take your money.
Carly, you've got such an organized life.
So, kind of to get back to what Carly and Mike had said about trying to segue us to the next agenda item and kind of summarize, how do we wrap up what we've talked about? We kind of all have a shared understanding of what our needs are, you know, kind of in this plan, we've talked about the size, some of the amenities and things. Do we need to take a vote on a sentence that iterates what that is? How do we communicate that? Do we take any action that formalizes that in a way to share with the village board? Do we feel like this shared conversation is enough to allow us to talk about it? How should we best approach that to be able to communicate those needs and priorities clearly and that they haven't changed? Because there are different village board members now than there were 3 years ago, and people with varying levels of people who watched our October meeting when we talked about equity, people who, you know, haven't seen all the discussions that we've had. So there's varying levels of engagement for different reasons. So how do we?
It would help if we had an
summarize this
agenda
conversation?
for that meeting, but it's too far in advance.
I'm sorry?
Do we have an agenda for that meeting or any idea of what the
The next-
agenda is gonna look like?
Great question. On the next agenda item, and maybe I should have done these in different order, what Martin has as tentative agenda items are, for the new library project, are the listening session and public comment feedback, like we kind of had on our agenda, potential sites, and I think he said conditions. So just a chance for our boards to come and talk about a site, or our boards to talk about a site. So, you know, if you want, I could ask him if he could leave that open, you know, or word it in a way that so our board could be asked to make a recommendation on the spot if Mike wants to ask. You know, could we as a board have that discussion at that time and come to a recommendation? Or another opportunity would be for them to bounce that back to our next week Wednesday meeting. And we could do it at that time and then report back to them later. So there's a couple different ways that could happen. There might be board members that don't want us to make a recommendation. It's kind of it's been a little bit of a chicken and egg problem. Do we go with the recommendation, and does that seem like the cart before the horse?
You can always back pocket it, right? But what I like to do is like, we have a recommendation, we know what we're going for, and then if they ask for it, we've already talked about it. And if they don't want to hear from us, then Mike is going to ask us anyway. So like, there's that. I was going to say, if I'm the village board, right, and we have a joint meeting, the first question I'm going to ask is I'm going to say, how do you know you need 4 acres? And what if, I mean, the thing I have heard from friends and community members is, well, just stop putting so many parking stalls in there, right? So I think if I were to make a presentation about this, I would first say, this is why we need 4 acres. This is what makes that the viable amount. And then, like, we can talk in the course of that about all of these listening sessions and all of the pieces that have to go into that. And, you know, obviously, we're not advocating for, like, a coffee shop in our library, right? Like, we are advocating for spaces that are needed in our community. and making sure that it's clear that we're not just, you know, building a tree house over here. And then I think once you have that piece in front of them and you've said, okay, this is what we need and we need 4 acres, then I think like you've led the horse to water and like you can't force them to drink, but like ultimately we have made the case for this is what we need, what is available.
Yeah.
And then we've kind of made the decision.
And you don't need to worry, I mean, we'll prove out the theorem. But
Oh,
we
I
wanna
believe
hear
we
from
have it.
you.
I'm just
We wanna-
suggesting like that's how I would approach it.
Yeah, eventually that'll all get proved.
I feel very confident that someone would ask that. That's, I mean,
It's a reasonable question.
right?
Yeah, and I think it's hard to like, again, there's been so much planning and conversations about where we don't want it, where we do want it, and not actually about what are the meat and bones of what makes up the library. And it's,
Agreed.
like, it's not just parking, but it's outdoor classroom space, it's room to grow, it's
That's where we need to start.
stormwater management, all
Yes.
these things that make
Agreed.
a site that's accessible.
But without having to prove that out and bring the dissertation to the board meeting, you guys could make a general statement tonight and not even name a site, but you could say that the priorities have not changed. This is the vision. These are the spaces that we want. We want outdoor space and green space for programming. We need 4 acres. You don't have to explain why that's true. You know it's true. So maybe you just put, maybe a statement comes out of tonight that says, this is what we, this is.
Except I do think somebody will ask,
Yep.
why is that true? And I think we have to be prepared to answer the
Yeah,
question.
I'm not suggesting that we don't know. I think
Yeah.
we are all on the same page here. I'm suggesting that is my recommendation on the strategy. Take it for what it is.
No, I think it's a great thought.
Yeah, we can
And I
answer all
appreciate
those
that.
questions.
Yes,
When they come
which
up.
is amazing and is what I would like.
I wondered, just as a suggestion, was kind of out there, if it might be most helpful to synthesize, I think maybe something coming from Jenny as the chair of the board. I think that was really helpful, all the background you did in the meetings, and that if you, again, you all agree on these are the statements that we want to communicate to the board, then Jennifer, you can work on a letter that I think should be read at the meeting and just get it out there.
My opinion, I will not be at the meeting on Monday. I'll be on an airplane over somewhere in the Pacific, or
Oh, that sounds someplace
southeast,
fun.
southwest, Arizona, somewhere in that area. I'm feeling like I'm gonna feel remiss about not being there. Like I'm gonna miss the fact that I can't be my vocal self and advocate for the things that I want.
I'll FaceTime you, Camille.
You know what, that would be interesting. But just because I won't be able to do that, I feel like I want to make sure that my opinion is included with the consensus of this group, so it doesn't seem fractured, doesn't seem like it's missing, it doesn't seem like it's not unwavering. I would like to have some type of a expression of our stance.
So how do we do that?
I mean, if you wanted Kyle send me your thoughts or what a letter might be from you, I can make sure that if that I include that in what I would say. Kyle, he's unavailable to be here. He had some things he wanted to make sure were said, and I think that would be a great way to share. You're clearly part of our board and would be there if you could.
Yep.
So if you want to send me those thoughts, I can include those and make sure that they get read at the meeting.
Noted.
That would be great.
Thank you.
I want to make sure what I've said at some of the visioning sessions, is that what we want to portray again, only maybe a little more specifically? Is that kind of where we're headed? I just want to make sure that I'm representing you guys' wishes. I think I know what you're looking for. I think hopefully I've been trying to project that forward as we've gone. But I just want to make sure if there's anything different or special you want me to include, please feel free to let me know, or if there's something else too. So
I would love for your statement to clear, Kyle, I think you should absolutely have statements of your own, but I would love for your statement to clearly state that we as a board met and we discussed this and we came to this conclusion. Because what I would like to avoid is for you to be identified as the person who's making these decisions in a vacuum. I mean, I think our community is able to watch this, able to like see us having this discussion in real time if they wish to. And also, I would like to make sure that we are very clearly stating that we are making this recommendation as a board entity and not as like an individual.
So to kind of speak to that point a little bit, we had a slide in our community presentation that talked about what was needed. It said we needed a 33,000 square foot building that's 2-story or 1-story space that has seating for community members of all ages, meeting spaces including study rooms, meeting rooms, and program spaces, collection space, staff workspace including storage, separate areas for active and quiet uses, so like children's areas and a quiet reading room, and then we said a 4-acre site ideal for current needs and future expansion potential. It does not cover energy efficient components, which we may want to add to that, but if we felt like those statements were reflective of what we've been talking about tonight, we could just approve that slide that was kind of in your packet as the framework for what we want to communicate.
Mm-hmm.
We did change that slide slightly because of some of the questions that were asked at the first listening session, and I'm trying to pull it up right now. Where are all the slides? One more page up, sorry. Access to computers was another thing. I think it's still the same stuff, just reworded slightly to better communicate what we were getting questions about.
I wonder some of your comments about COVID accommodations of the air quality and the importance of like drop off, pick up windows, things like that that have been added since your 2018.
It's not lost on me, like the federal government put trillions of dollars into the K-12 system, especially for low-income schools, to like, instead of having table, buy desks, like get people away from each other, because and that was not a Democratic or Republican, like that was something that everybody agreed on, and the whole point is like this isn't going away, or if it does, it might come back. Like let's not build something, not you know, like thinking about what we know and what could come back, and my gosh, nobody wants to go through this again. So, you know, how can we make the experience better if we ever had to?
So two things.
For next to nothing.
I think that's, I think we sort of update the vision by not ignoring the current situation. But two things I missed from the slide from the original visioning session, and maybe I just missed it, the connection to the outdoors, because that was something that was really big in the visioning sessions. And I do think sustainability was something that everybody mentioned too.
Yeah, those are great points. This slide was never intended to summarize like
Okay.
and it was just kind of a handy dandy way to try to.
But I'm trying to,
Yes.
because the vision that we're getting at is, I mean, we're trying to stay true to that original vision.
Right, and I just want to throw out another way to think about this, is that, as I've been trying to explain it to people, we're not waiting to see what site we get so we can figure out how to design a library to fit the site. We were in design development for the library that was going to go to construction. What's happening here is we are looking for a site that's able to receive the library that we have already designed. Now we need to remind people what all of those things are and why that vision's important. But we're not going back to what size should it be and should it be 2 acres or 4 acres. We know how many acres we need to fit the library that is already designed, that was about to go to construction. So, it's very clear what we were going to do, because we actually, we're moving it forward.
I just want to add that, Jenny, I think when you're speaking for us, if you go back to your verb statements earlier and use that to describe why we need those things in our vision, I think that will tie it together for everyone in a nice, what our actual vision really looks like and why it looks like.
Powerful.
Yeah.
So
What action do we take? How do we put that in the form of some official action to kind of show that shared vision as a board?
Do you want us to make a motion?
I don't know. I'm kind of asking, should we?
I'm suggesting that we make a motion that using this discussion that we have had, we put together a written statement of what we require as, like, what our baseline requirements are, and a specific location that meets those requirements.
Location or locations, if.
Location
there
or
aren't.
locations, yes, I'm
But
happy.
If somebody
I'm
comes
happy.
to us with another location that hits
Somebody
that,
wants to
all those
give us-
criteria is ready to build, then
Well,
let's
we-
talk, but,
Sure.
Yep.
Yeah, but it has to happen now, because we have to keep moving forward.
Right.
the only people who said like, oh, well, you guys should stop and think about were the people who haven't been part of this process for
Right.
3 years. Like,
10 years.
there's no stopping. We know what we want. We're actually, every second we wait, we're wasting money, so.
We already have 4 months of delaying cost escalation just in
We
this
do.
process.
no?
Right,
And
right.
I understand the need for the process, I'm just, I'm keeping track of dollars and the meter is running.
So I hear a motion from Coral that for the library, or for the village board joint meetings, that we will put forward a vision based on our what is needed slide that we've shared.
We're
to include
reaffirming the vision,
sustainability,
really.
To reaffirm to include sustainability, to include COVID and HVAC requirements, and that we want to make sure that we are advocating for the library and the library for what we feel that has been requested by the community for the last how many years? Is that kind of your motion?
That is my motion.
And when the village upped it from 6 to 10, they talked about sustainability and they talked about environmental
Yep.
factors, so just making sure that those are really highlighted in there, I
Yep.
think is important.
I'm happy to help with wording or review or whatever.
We have tomorrow to do that.
I can help. So I have a motion, do I have a second?
I will second.
Any further discussion? All in favor of this motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you, guys. I can't tell you how much your thoughtfulness and your listening and your caring and your support of this community means to me. And it means a lot to a lot of people. And I really appreciate all the time and effort you're putting into this. And we will advocate for the library, and we will advocate for what we've heard and what we think the community needs. So thank you
It
guys
should be
so
noted
much.
that motion was, there was 100% consensus on it as well. Like, there's,
Make a note that I would do.
Thanks, Elise, so much for your time.
Thank you, Elise. Talk about above
Yeah.
and beyond.
I don't know, bring here for a second, but.
For a second. Sometimes it's okay.
So we can see your face on your phone.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll FaceTime. She's still at the board meeting.
Okay.
I'll see you all on Monday night.
Thank you very much.
So are we on D now?
Yes.
So, I'm
Thinking
kind
of
of
meetings
segueing
to
from
get
the-
home to.
So I just want to reiterate that I think it's really important that we go into the joint meeting with a real goal to work together in partnership with the village
Yes.
board.
Oh, right.
Which I think we've been really trying to do since I started, and we really want to continue to do, but just to reiterate that.
Yep.
And that, I think that's kind of where, it's kind of like a chicken and egg question with some of the things, what do we do first? Because we want to work together, and this is, granted a difficult decision, but we're gonna have more difficult decisions down the road. And so we want to set the tone for good communication and working together to talk through those challenges together with the village board. I said the agenda a little bit. The third part of the agenda will be determining next steps. And so when we leave that meeting, we want to have a real sense of what is our next step? What do we need to do to get the information needed for everybody to work together to come to that decision in as informative a way as possible? And if that means we need to have Jeff or the architects or get statistics or whatever we need to do, we can do that. We just can't do all that in things for all sites, and so we want to be able to make sure that those efforts are focused and purposeful. Also, like that we have a time frame, so we don't want to
Yes.
just delay for the purposes of delaying. If we need to delay a month to do some work that's really important, we'll do that. We don't want to just push it down the road. So just knowing specifically what steps we need to take, who's going to take them, and whether or not they want us, if they want us to make a recommendation at that meeting, that would be a possibility. If they want us to make it at the next library board meeting, or if they don't want us to make a recommendation, that's something
Right.
that could come through too. I think we kind of set the groundwork for that with the action we've already taken tonight, but just to kind of be able to talk through them and know that we want to have specific goals and steps and work together to make sure we have the information that everybody needs to feel like they're making the best choice for the community. That's the process. I
So
think
just to
that's
clarify
all.
then, should our recommendation be that we do the site analysis on the sites that are potential?
I think I want the village board to tell us what analysis they need.
That's totally fair.
Right.
I just wanna make sure.
I think for them to say, hey, you know, I need soil borings at Keller Alpine, or hey,
Sure.
I need blah, to be able to make that
Right.
decision. I think I would like to hear that from them.
Perfect.
That's-
That sounds good to me.
Is there?
That's all D, right? So that gives us to, our next meeting is Monday. We know Kyle won't be there. He'll be on an airplane, but he'll be represented by the rest of us.
I will also miss Wednesday.
We'll also miss Wednesday, this whole traveling thing. COVID got really nice, we can just Zoom everything, right?
I do apologize, I feel like we do need to have that Wednesday meeting. We'll try to keep it as succinct as we responsibly can, but we'll definitely have things to talk about one way or the other. So we will plan on doing that. The Wednesday meeting will be via Zoom still. So just to
Don't get
cause
away
lots
from
of
us that
confusion.
early, Kyle.
I hear what you're saying.
But I still will
Yeah.
be
It's
there.
very hot out there, so won't be in.
He'll be in a bar, so it'll be good.
Right, yeah.
Sounds great. And then are there any future agenda items that we need to add? I think part of it will come out of our next meeting. And with that, I need a motion to adjourn, please.
So moved.
Is there a
Second.